Welcome to the Winners and Losers Show. Hello, everybody. My name is Hank Thompson. I'm the host of the show. I'll be the host of the show until I come up with a new opening bit, which I never plan on doing. I think I did that the first episode ever or something early, and then I just go with it. Because if there's anything I have in spades, it's loyalty to bad comedy. So, welcome to the show, everybody. This is Winners and Losers. I've been doing perfect unions a bunch lately, not consistently, of course, because I'm me, but I've been meaning to bring back Winners and Losers as an interview and more generalized talk show, where I interview and talk to people, interesting people, and I'm reaching out to people to get guests on, and looking forward to having a variety of offerings here on my whatever it is I'm trying to do with my career. And this is the first episode of that, so it's great. I'm excited, a little bit different, nice change of pace, and we're looking forward to a lot more. So I'm happy to introduce you to my friend Kyle Thiermann. He is he's a professional surfer, a journalist who he's just a total pro, this guy, man. He does the Motherfucker Awards, which if you haven't heard of it, he and Chris Ryan, author of Sex at Dawn and Civilized to Death and the Tangentially Speaking podcast, created it 2 years ago. I got involved and did some editing for it this November. That's how I got to know, this past November 2019. And that's how I got to know Kyle. And we really hit it off. It's kind of like long lost brothers a little bit. You know, I'm the older brother with a lot of bullshit to say, and he's the nice younger brother with abs who listens to my nonsense, and for that I'm grateful. But he does a great show, a podcast. He has a podcast himself called the Kyle Thiermann Show. He writes. He does. You guys even doing stand-up comedy, and he has ducks, which I am extremely jealous of. They are very charismatic, these ducks. I don't know if you've ever spent some time with them, but I highly recommend it. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Kyle_T_man. I'll have links in the description. And go to the Motherfucker Awards, motherfuckerawards.com. You can see some of the videos I made and all the hard work he put in on that. Just really nails it. The dude just does a good job and works really, really hard. So Kyle.surf is his site if you want to check out what else he's up to and check out his podcast, on which this episode will be appearing. So we're doing this as sort of a co-release. I'm putting it out today, or as you're listening to this, it's already out, and I think it's going to go up on his feed in like a month because he's got like extra episodes, a backlog. He's got an inventory of episodes, and I don't. So mostly it's him kind of interviewing me in this one. Of course, I'm always excited to spend time with anybody willing to sit still while I blabber on with my bullshit. So I'm grateful for Kyle for doing that. We cover a lot of ground, mostly like big structural stuff like capitalism and socialism and all the other in-betweens, I guess, and it's kind of my own personal interpretation of a lot of this stuff. And I'm not an expert on it, nor do I claim to be, but I do present myself as somebody willing to defend these concepts. And actually, and it was not like a defend yourself kind of situation. It was just a great conversation. Kyle's a very curious person. It's important to have non-confrontational conversations about this kind of stuff. You know, I feel a responsibility to be accurate and thorough and present these concepts like Marxism and socialism as clearly as I can, as I'm able, given my limited exposure and knowledge. I'm in the middle or near the beginning of a learning process about all this stuff as well, as are many, many millions of people all over the world, as it's becoming more and more apparent that the current economic system isn't serving everybody well. It's serving a few people very well and leaving a lot of people behind. Oh, and it's also probably going to destroy the planet, or at least the human habitability of the planet. You know, when we're gone, there'll be plenty of piles of garbage and steel structures and concrete to haunt any alien visitors, and the lizard people when they evolve, and then the squid people when they evolve, or octopus people. I mean, come on, let's be honest. You ever meet a squid? Fucking idiots. They're the idiots of the ocean. I've gone squid fishing, by the way. They really are like moths. They're attracted to light. One minor correction I just wanted to clarify on is at some point in the second half, we were talking about the 4-day work week and people having more free time, more leisure time. And Kyle said something about how Google gives employees more time to, it helps them come up with creative ideas or something like that. And I thought he was referring to a specific experiment that I said Google Japan did in implementing the 4-day work week. I was wrong. It was actually Microsoft Japan. So just want to put that out there. It happened, and it happened very successfully. Money went up. People got happier, and the 4-day work week had gained yet another example of why we should switch to that. Fucking psycho-capitalists forcing everybody to work all the time. And then feel guilty when you're not working. You're not being productive. Monetize your hobbies. I'm trying to do that with, Anyway, I hope this is the first of many conversations I have with Kyle. I definitely would love to have him back on. I'd like to clarify a few of the things I had said. I wanted to get into a commodification of different markets. He sort of set up a notion of like government controlling nail prices of like the hammer and nail type of nail, not sex. And we were going in a lot of directions, and I was leaving a lot of threads open. And I just, for some reason, that one particular, I wanted to be like, no, we're not trying to tell people what to fucking charge for nails. We just think that maybe electricity companies might not need to be profit based, as it so often creates problems and kills people, like PG&E here in California. Not everything has to be subject to commodification. That is to say that not everything needs to be in a market per se. Markets are good in a lot of different things, but not all things. And so, there's a concept of public wealth and public good that is minimized under capitalism, and I support an economic and a political system that I would say maximizes it, I guess. That's a simplistic notion. But, as my hero, Professor Richard Wolff, points out, markets existed before capitalism, and they'll exist after capitalism. So that was just something that stuck out in my brain, too. Again, not an argument that I was having with Kyle. I tend to fall forward. I'm like a cartoon character rolling down a hill. I tend to just sort of tumble my way through my thoughts and hopefully regurgitate something approaching an entertaining or interesting listen. That's generally the idea. And hopefully that works. I definitely have a tendency to leave some threads dangling, but I'm sure Kyle and I will be able to pick those up another day. So please enjoy, please listen, like, and subscribe, or, do all the clicking on shit that podcast hosts ask you to do. Check out Kyle's show. Look in the description. He's always up to something cool, and he's an easy guy to talk to and to listen to. And goddamn, great abs. We did a Zoom call, and I was like, dude, could you please sit down? I'm tired of looking at your fucking quarantine abs. JK, of course. Why am I saying JK? That's not like a thing. I've only been doing that in the last few weeks. But no, honestly, I saw his face. He has quarantine hair, which is entertaining. I think there's everybody's getting these shitty ass 1970s movies hair, and it's enjoyable. I'm liking it. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Kyle Thiermann.
Let's do it, man. I've been looking forward to this. I feel like every time I talk to you, it's basically a podcast.
Agreed. Yeah.
We both speak in paragraphs, and then at the end of it, we're like, shit, we should have been recording.
Yeah. We after the Motherfucker Awards, we had that big meal, or we went to the hotel restaurant. We sat for like 3 hours, and we didn't record it. Like a couple of assholes. We had a conversation without trying to record or monetize it. Like, what kind of jerks were we?
How have your conversations with Kaj Larson been as well? So right before we started recording, your Kaj, who's a Navy SEAL, you've been working with him.
So this is recorded. This is the show, yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So wonderful. He's such a nice guy. He's got that thing where when people say someone's really nice, it's usually it's a little bit, it raises the hair on the back of your neck slightly, because you're like, what are they actually saying about that nice? But then you meet Kaj, you're like, dude, you could totally be a much bigger asshole than you are. Not that he isn't. He's incredible.
Oh, but he could be. Well, he's like a Navy SEAL with an 8-pack, and then also a super sweet dude. I'm convinced that it's because he works out like 3 times a day, and his endorphins are just so high that it's like real nice.
Probably.
I've met those people who are just like, they're always moving. Like, I'm going to go do a boxing class, and then go do CrossFit, and then do a beach workout, and they're just always high on that from moving all day.
But his energy doesn't feel disordered, though. It's pretty steady, and it's comforting. Like, it's a good, you just feel good being around. He's kind of got that Labrador default energy,
right?
Which is great. So, but really cool, easy to work with. Have just an interesting window into the career he's had as well, like just having some conversation with him. So very, very interesting. And thanks for hooking me up with that guy and for running the Motherfucker Awards. That was something I was proud to be a part of last year.
Well, you were the behind the scenes engine. I don't think that people realize just how much work an editor does. I think that it's a little bit like I don't know, writers, where people are like, oh yeah, will you just write this thing real quickly? And then writers like, okay, yeah, I'll have that back to you in about a year, because it takes so much so much longer.
You have to stare at a blank page for 8 months before it starts working.
Well, there's the creators in LA who are in front of the camera, and they're the ones who tend to get all of the praise, and people all gravitate towards them. But then there's this whole industry, which is 99% of it, which is on the other side of the camera, and they're the people who are the animators and the editors and the producers, and it's this engine that most people don't get to peek into very often, but one that you've lived in for a number of years.
Correct. And credit to Ben, the guy who did the graphics. He did the beautiful golden statues moving around, and that's a type of wizardry that's far beyond my abilities. I was happy that I had like a background that you were looking for, political consciousness and awareness. Not that you had to agree with my opinions, but like I've been paying attention to politics since I was a teenager, working at the Young Turks, just every day producing essentially a mini documentary. I worked on a show called The Breakdown, where you found new YouTube clips and news stories and headlines. And so I'm also a self-taught animator, so I have all this sort of skill that I was able to offer, as well as the political kind of awareness. Like I had the Rolodex of clips to look up, the search terms. And I actually, in a previous iteration at the Young Turks, like about 7 years ago, I was the head clickbait writer there for a while too. So not just words, not just video is something I say I'm good at.
Was that your job description? Head clickbait?
It was top bullshitter. Yeah, it was the master manipulator of clickbait. Is a
didn't
very
you tell me
weird. I hated it.
Didn't you tell me that you got in trouble for one clickbait article that you wrote or something? What was that?
All right, so yes, there was a. So yeah, I started at the Young Turks to like work on their comedy division, to come out of that. Like I did stand up and short films and blah blah blah, and so I was doing stuff like that. But they figured out I can write, and they're like, "Hey, try these write. Try writing the." Wow, Kyle, we got to edit this part of the podcast, so I can't speak. We want to try you out, see how you do. And I screwed up by being really good at it. And one of the stories was about, within like the first week or two, before I realized it's not trying to score funny points here, was Jank and Anna had a discussion about abortion after 20 weeks. So it was some story about that. And they didn't agree completely on whether after 20 weeks or not. I don't even know what their positions were, but they had a nice little discussion, and it was a good video. So I wanted to try to attract people to clicking on that. So I wrote the headline, "Abortion after 20 weeks. Is it hot or not?" And then I guess it's not. Apparently not.
It's very not.
I'm for it.
No, but that's one of those subjects. But hey, yeah, you're in the comedy world, so you're used to trying new stuff out in front of an audience of 15 or 20 people, and then having them gasp and being like, "Ooh, okay, might not go back to that one." Yeah. But then when it's a headline and it's 15 or 20,000 people, it's a much bigger gasp.
Yeah. Come on, I've performed for up to 22 people, Kyle. So right. Give me a little credit here. I tried pretty hard. But yeah, millions of people see those headlines, and that's it's such a strange job to do clickbait professionally, because you're like the packaging on the product is how I always sort of conceptualized it. It's like if whatever you decide, because I also design the thumbnails and then all the SEO and the keywords and the description and stuff. So whatever you decide, and they can override you, but it's not like there's an approval process. You're just sort of stocking the shelf with however you decide to design the packaging. That can make an enormous difference in the amount of people that come and click on it. And you're trying to reveal what's in the story without saying what's in the story. You're trying to emotionally challenge people with those "you won't believe" and the "try not to smile." You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll fart. Like these sort of manipulative ways of challenging people to get them to click on the video. And it's a frustrating job, though, because when you do a good job, that means you were best at manipulating people. And it doesn't. And I didn't like doing it because I felt like it was a total waste of the jet fuel that kind of drives my creativity. So I would be exhausted by the end of the day of doing that because you brainstorm 20 headlines per story or whatever. And I forgot what we were talking about.
Oh, well, I always see the ones where it's like 7 things that you need to know about, Mitch McConnell, or there's a numbered thing. Yeah. It's become so important. I mean, for authors too. I was listening to David Sedaris on a podcast yesterday, and he said that he's just constantly thinking about book titles. It's just like an awareness that he has when he's looking around in the day. He's like, okay, let's explore diabetes with owls. That sounds like a good book idea.
Yeah. Corduroy.
But people don't think about it.
What
One of those unconscious things. Right.
Elbow patches, corduroy, smoking jackets, weird pipes for cigarettes for some reason.
And so you got involved in politics as a teenager, and then you started working with the Young Turks. How did your politics evolve through the course of that time? Like, one thing that really stood out to me when you and I met was how much you just understand the system, and more particularly your understanding of campaign finance, which was a real point that we wanted to underscore in the Motherfucker Awards. Make it somewhat beyond partisan politics, where we could just talk about how these campaigns are funded and how a politician won't do anything for you unless you pay them was really the simple point that we were trying to make. And I was really heartened with the kind of depth of understanding that you had around that issue.
Wow, you really built the pressure up on that one. Thanks. I appreciate the compliment, though. It's transactional. Like, that's the thing. I think 2 things people don't realize are, it's a purchase. You're not, Coca-Cola doesn't need to express itself to Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. You know what I mean? Or to all the other senators that they buy. And pick a company. I'm not just picking on Coca-Cola, but like any company, they aren't just trying to say something because they're feeling chipper and they want their voice to be heard. They're buying something. It's one of the best returns on investment you can do is to control the rules. Politics is about who writes the rules. And so the other thing that I think people don't understand is how shitty people are. And I don't mean that in a cynical, all humans are crappy, but when we have these big systems of patronage, and the further away you get from your in-group, from your core of people who you see as worthy of your attention or of your alarm, right? Like if you care about those and the further away you get from that, the more harm you're able to tolerate imposing on others. So politics, especially in America, it's opaque, it's intentionally complicated. The tax system, for instance, I think is a great example of like keeping things messy so that an industry can exist in order to deal with the mess. In other countries, they just send you your taxes on a postcard or in an email that says, here's your thing. If you object, you can go deal with it, but otherwise sign it. And it takes 3 minutes to do your taxes in most countries because they already have the information. Here, an entire
industry. Which countries?
Like Switzerland is the example I think I can find articles for. Challenge me on it. But I know that in Northern European countries, basically, where competency is valued as a trait for a government. But in like H&R Block in America, I don't know why I'm getting into the tax thing right now, but H&R Block lobbies the government to make sure that these rules stay complicated and esoteric so they can keep charging for it. It's absurd. That's just a small example. But people tend to, human beings are good. Like our default and our instinct is, I wouldn't hurt somebody. I wouldn't do what they're doing. And politics lets you displace the pain from your immediate surroundings, especially in this like capital city sort of Hunger Games style world where we've got these, ruling class and the managerial class that supports the rulers. They're benefiting greatly from the system, and the voiceless, the workers, the people with stricken by poverty or people trapped in these lower economic layers, their voices they're invisible. They don't exist in terms of what the government prioritizes. So I think that the government, or at least that kind of corruption trades, or one of the things that supports it is how much people assume that people aren't as bad as they really can be. I'm not sure if that made any sense. So
very well. No, definitely said. I set you up, and no,
Wow.
You did well on that. You know, two of the groups that we worked with to research the motherfucker nominees were Lawrence Lessig's group. Lawrence Lessig is a Harvard law professor who runs an organization called Equal Citizens that works on campaign finance reform, and the other was a group called Represent Us that's run by a guy named Josh Silver. You sent me that video just recently that Represent Us did. I think they're one of the more comprehensive groups out there. And in the video, they said that in the last 5 years, the 200 largest companies has spent $5.8 billion influencing government, but they've been rewarded $4.4 trillion in tax support. So speaking to one of the best returns on investment you can have, if you are one of those huge companies, it's just a business decision. Why wouldn't you?
Exactly. It'd be especially if you accept the sociopathic mandate of permanent or of eternal growth and require in the way capitalism insists that a company must show better quarterly profits than the last year or else it's failing. Like I went to school for business. One of the first things they teach you, actually, I remember the first thing they taught us about was double taxation, which was like, I just remember thinking like, wow, what the fuck does that got to do with business? That like the day one at a university to learn about business. But they teach you that.
What is double taxation?
Well, just that you are corporations pay taxes and then individuals pay taxes was basically what they were saying. It's like, yeah, you have income. I mean, at every level of society, whenever money flows from one entity to another, somebody takes a little scraper and scoops off a little bit for themselves. So oftentimes that's the government. Oftentimes it's like your financial advisor or your accountant or your lawyer, or, people, or your agent or whatever industry you're in. It's rare that money moves around without it being taken or without pieces of it being pulled away from it. So anyway, I was saying something
the idea. Yeah, I want to hear more about the idea of sociopathy being connected to perpetual growth. I think that's a very big idea beyond politics, and I've heard you talk about it before. How did you come to that idea? And just tell me more about it.
Sure. I highly recommend this one show I listen to quite a bit called Citations Needed. I'd say they probably come at things from a lefty perspective if people are cautious about that or whatever. But they're very thoroughly researched, and they recently did an episode about, they kind of take tropes and sort of just like break them apart and say, well, why is this working? And then they go through the history of it all. It's really informative. They recently did an episode about the GDP. Unfortunately, I can't think of exact quotes from it right now to further inform us, but I highly recommend people go listen to that one about the GDP and how this measure of society's productive capacity doesn't include home care or domestic labor or work people do that is off the books, that as well, but like all the different behaviors of human beings that add to a fulfilling life, like joy or pleasure or relaxation or leisure, and like none of that is involved in GDP. GDP is just about pure numbers, and to some degree, it's easier to measure things that are quantifiable than things that are less quantifiable, like emotions, like happiness, right? Like those sorts of things you can only really be assessed via interpreting surveys, which is imperfect at best. But the GDP is this dominant figure that we all look at, and it's gone up and up and up and up and up over the decades. But diseases of despair are increasing. That means addiction and suicides and the various ways that mental illness can manifest itself out of depression, out of desperation and stress. And it's just, the point basically is like the GDP is a measure of capitalist health. Of, are the rich people doing well? And similarly, you can make a similar case for the stock market. I think something like 80% of all wealth in the stock market is owned by the top 10% of the country. I'm not sure if those numbers are exactly correct, but it's nowhere near the same, or the amount that its position in our media would make it seem like. So it's kind of a coup in a way to get a society to completely only measure or to form its economic let's say, pride, or it's how it measures itself based on whether or not on a measure of, are the rich doing better? So if GDP goes up, suicides go up. Well, they don't care about that part, but the GDP rising, that means that America's working and the country's doing great. Well, it's not. It's not. I personally believe that an economy's purpose should be to reduce stress and to actually make parenting as easy as possible. I think that should be the goal of an economy. I think the whole point of a society should be to make people have stress-free childhoods, as weirdly as that might seem. Because stress-free, at least to minimize stress, maybe you can never eliminate it. But like reducing a stressful childhood makes for a lot less assholes when they become adults.
And sociopathy, and a lot of these decisions that we're seeing at the very top, where you'll have a corporation fund a politician to deregulate, let's say, environmental laws so that you can just destroy the Arctic, and things that most people who have had experiences in nature, most people who want to contribute to the betterment of society would never do.
Right.
But you see these concentration, like deregulation. Fundamentally, my understanding of it is that it just concentrates wealth and power
right
into the hands of fewer and fewer people, which we see now, more than ever since Citizens United allowed, corporations to give unlimited amounts of money to politicians in the form of campaign contributions and ads. And
even the term deregulation. Sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, the term deregulation itself is, and I'm not saying you're choosing to frame it by that way, but like it's a very Frank Luncian. He's the right wing pollster who figures that he's the one who came up with instead of calling it the estate tax, call it the death tax. Like, I'm not sure if he came up with deregulation. I'm not saying that, but like the language.
Was he the guy who also came up with climate change versus global warming?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, he does focus groups. He's got very yellow teeth too for some reason. Side point, but who am I to judge? But he can kind of come off as somewhat reasonable. He's done some roundtable things with different groups. It's not like he's just one of these, just got to be completely evil all the time, like Steve Bannon or something like that. But he is working for the empire. Yeah, he's definitely like he'd be the guy that say, hey, maybe we shouldn't call it the Death Star. Let's call it the Love Moon or something.
Right. Better branding.
Yeah.
we need Hank in there battling him with the clickbait titles. You're like
right.
Luke Skywalker and he's Darth Vader, just coming up with one better title after
you
the
won't
next.
Believe how much force was disrupted by the murder of
Hank's like, no, it's the Rape Star. He's like, no, it's the Love Moon.
Don't call it the Rape Star. People don't like that. And then the Democrats would probably nominate
other stars.
Yeah, but it's a lesser Rape Star, so you should pick the lesser Rape Star, not the big Rape Star. That's the choices that we'll offer you.
We're gonna settle on the Freedom Star.
Right. People love freedom. Got to get that.
People love freedom.
Mm-hmm. But
and that is go for it.
Well, the deregulation thing. It's like it tricks, like, people kind of intuitively don't like rules. So you hear the phrase deregulation is a good, or, people sort of approach that term as if it's a goal in itself, but the actual goal should be what makes sense. Too many rules is bad, but not enough rules is also bad. And the way people who wield that term as a political cudgel use it is to trick regular folks. But meanwhile, what they're really doing is writing the rules themselves to benefit themselves. Like, these things aren't complicated. Whoever writes the rules will benefit from the rules. That's a society right there. In our country, in America, the very, very wealthy and their extremely well-paid attorneys and lobbyists, they write the rules, and they want to keep it that way. If, in my fantasy scenario, more of a utopian socialist kind of situation, everybody gets to have a voice in who writes in the rules that are being written. We still need rules. You're still going to have regulations. And when people bristle at the idea of rules, I always like to just point out, look at the popularity of sports. Isn't sports all about rules and fairness and a justice system built into it? Like in football, like there's a referee on the field when he or she has people there's a justice system there. There's a review process, but it's heavily rule based because people intuitively also understand fairness. Fairness is extremely built into, I think, genetic code. I think we're genetically coded for feeling fairness and for feeling upset when things are unfair. If you've ever seen the grape cucumber study with the two monkeys, beautiful.
No, I haven't. But then I go.
I'll finish this real fast and let you get your point. So these, I talked about this on my show. I think it was the 70s, and damn it, I'm sorry I don't know the search terms, but just search for grape monkey research or cucumber grape monkey research. And so they have a simple task of like they gave the monkey a rock and then it has to give it back, and the reward is of food. So there's two monkeys in cages right next to each other. They can see each other. The first one gets a cucumber. No problem. Happy to have the cucumber. The next one, they give a grape. And everybody knows grape beats cucumber, right? In terms of just sheer hedonism of the exchange. So
Clearly.
They give the second one the grape, and the first one gets pissed. And I know we don't all speak monkey, but we speak body language. And he starts like hammering his hand, and he's mad, and you can tell he's just like, oh, what the? And so they go back to him, and he plays along with the rock, task. And you can kind of get the sense he's probably hoping for a grape on round 2, but then they give him a cucumber, and hilariously, he takes the cucumber and throws it. He just throws it out. He whips it, having only just seen another monkey get a grape instead of a cucumber at first. And are these higher order thinking animals? Are these like supremely conscious human beings with imbued with the grace and will of a greater being that's giving them, I'm trying to act like humans think we're so special. We're not. We just have this burden of consciousness. But I really do believe that fairness is kind of just intuitively built in. I cleaned fish tanks for years. I owned an aquarium service. And one thing I always noticed, this is bullshit, by the way, here. I don't know if this is relevant, but fish always go for the bigger piece. It's like that pizza thing between siblings. Like, you can always intuitively tell which slice is the biggest one. At least as a fat guy, as a recovering fat guy myself. That's something that's been in my mind. But I think fairness is like kind of genetically coded, especially in primates, particularly in a social animal like humans.
The tangent that I was going to go off on was there's a This American Life podcast where they go back and do a story on the origins of football. And you might know about this already, but there was a Native American group of students who were at a school called Cargyle, and they started kicking ass. They started kicking all these other schools' asses in the early iterations of football. So all of these new trick tactics were implemented by the other schools. Like there was one where they would have uniforms with a pocket inside, and they would just put the football inside the pocket and then start running. And there was a guy who started implementing all these rules of fairness to make the game of football better, more of an equitable game. And his name was Pop Warner, where Pop Warner football comes from. Okay. Yeah. Huh. I wanted to just go back. Yeah, sure. You covered a lot right there. But
that's what I do.
I wanted to talk about the distinction, between capitalism, socialism, and crony capitalism. Socialism is a dirty word in a lot of circles. And I wanted to, you have a good understanding of it. Can you just, I guess, go through your...
Sure. I have an
your argument.
I have an emerging understanding of it. It's not something I was taught in school. They don't teach socialism or socialist principles in American education. And actually, this kind of ties back to a question you'd asked earlier, a part 1 of one of your questions about my upbringing in politics too. Like, I grew up in a pretty standard American Midwestern suburban Chicago upbringing, conservative dad, shot guns around, but politics wasn't like a big part. Like some families really identify it, to use a newer term, within their how they exchange or how they partner with the entertainment television that they consume. So for some people, politics is just like what they watch on TV. In my family, though, my dad was a conservative guy. I wasn't really exposed to like liberal or hippie principles or anything. So I had to kind of internalize some of that. So that's sort of the starting point. Like for Christmas when I was 13, my dad gave me a shotgun, a Remington 12 gauge shotgun. Great, beautiful weapon. And I was a member of the NRA, as a junior member of the NRA in my teen years. But my brain started booting up around that time and started thinking things through, and just kind of was like, I don't know if I like what I'm reading about this NRA business here. This would have been in the mid 90s. And so I've evolved from sort of a rebellious teenager, kind of just seeing bullshit, but not really sure how to categorize it. And then eventually it's like, okay, I guess I'm sort of a liberal person. You start to consume media, or, it starts to inform what you choose to ingest, right? That's sort of, we all kind of bubble ourselves up in our own little bias yurts. And over time, I into my 20s, and I was running a business in Chicago, and then but I'm super into like progressive politics and looking for something, because there's not a lot of progressive outlets, especially back then, like let's say early 2000s, mid 2000s, and Young Turks was one of the few. That's where started my long history with them, leading up to this past year where I got laid off, and also the union drama that went down. I was part of the union movement there that got real messy. So we can talk about that later if you want. But over time, I've become more and more, I've been pulled, or I've swam myself more and more left. Like it just makes more sense to me as you start to really understand power. I think that's the kind of thing that I would rest my politics on, is getting a grasp, and everything seems to clarify this too, of how power works, in that people who have power want it, they want more, and they want to prevent others from getting it. It's kind of that straightforward in a way. So over time, I've become, as well as the rationale behind collective thinking, and even, to be honest, like keto, changing my diet drastically. I've had great health improvements since then, a few years back, and I used to kind of reject that thinking behind like the paleo way of eating. And I'm not trying to start a big discussion on all that nutrition stuff. You could probably have, centuries of podcasts to fight over nutrition. But the rationality behind paleo started to click for me in a way, and it applies to everything else. Like why, meaning basically like, well, we should probably eat the way our ancestors ate. Our bodies are designed, our bodies were evolved in a certain set of conditions when these certain types of foods were available. Therefore, it makes sense that we're probably best conditioned if we eat something similar. And I do a keto version of that. I do like a lazy keto version of it. If I were to get married, I would probably tighten it up. I look good in my dress. But that kind of rationality works for politics, in my opinion, if in an emotional sense, right? Like I really think that. So my own personal story. I've dealt with a lot of depression and mental illness in my family. I have a very dramatic thing with my mom. It'd probably make a great movie. There's all kind of, we involuntarily committed. It gets pretty intense. There's a lot of wild. Wild as if wild. That's not the right word. Like wild on E. Like I'm on a beach showing my tits. Not quite that kind of wild. But I think that like kind of like looking at history or looking at or at least taking an understanding of hunter-gatherer, and actually Chris Ryan, a friend of ours, he did my show years ago too. Met him through the Young Turks, and he helped a lot too in sort of informing this. It works with sex. It works with all these like there's a tension between our instincts and modernity. There's this feeling, this sort of subtext, I'm not sure if that's the right word, of emotional pain and emotional motivation. Because I really think that generally we can intellectualize our way around most problems and solutions, and intellectualizing things is good. But really, when it comes down to it, emotions are what drive behavior. Like with money, like intellectually, I want money. I'd like to have a lot more money than I have. But it's not because I want money. It's because I want the emotional relief that money offers you, and the emotional opportunities for positive emotions. So I sort of come at all this from a systems perspective, but trying to sort of, and it's by its own nature sloppy, but trying to sort of inject an emotional system into how we should behave. And if you look at our ancestors and the way hunter-gatherers made do, and with how communication developed and how language emerged from this evolving primate in the African trees and savannas, we were a group animal. There's nothing is indicating that we weren't group animals at all. And our modern, like, all you have to do to imagine. Sorry, is this answering your question? I feel like I'm just off. And
no, it is. I think that you're going to get to socialism eventually, I'm continuing to let you go around this. I trust you.
The two things.
No, with most guests, I would have interrupted you by now, but I can sense that you're doing a large circle, and you're gonna stomp the landing.
Right.
With I can sense that you're going towards egalitarianism. And how our ancestors were fiercely egalitarian, and how that then informed your understanding of setting up rules in society to benefit most. But I do think that, as I said in the beginning, socialism is a dirty word. So I just want you to kind of define that and how you came to that understanding and what it actually looks like.
Yeah, it's not so much that like this is evolutionary emotional stuff I'm talking about from our group origins is about like, hey, we should all go live on communes and just be like, let's try to be like the way we were. Those days are long gone. We're not getting back to that. But it's more about trying to kind of explain where so much of this pain comes from. Like loneliness. The loneliness is a huge epidemic in America right now. I'd say probably globally, but people are and depression and addiction and all these different ways that people that these kind of vast emotional systems are propelled are generally because it's in conflict with the way our instincts are ordered. And our instincts were forged through all those years of evolution, however many. So yes, egalitarianism is great. So bringing it up to socialism, I guess, let's define the terms then. Capitalism, I'd say, and this is going to be a little sloppy here, is a system of organizing resources and people, which are a resource, into productive capacities, and then emphasizing private ownership and private decision-making about where the profits, or about how to do it, as well as where the result of the work goes. Roughly, right? In a pretty broad generic sense. Socialism is incorporates more of similarly. It's not about not producing things or not organizing into large groups for a specific task or a goal. If anything, that's what human beings do extremely well. But it's about making it more fair as to where the surplus goes, where the creation of all that work goes, and it's also about maintaining dignity for people, is emphasizing the emotional safety and emotional security, because that's what having money is. It's emotional security, and in a way that prioritizes human fulfillment and human decency, and hopefully, like in a utopian sense, every single person on the planet should be able to fulfill their human potential. That doesn't mean everybody should be an opera singer or a rapper, as if that's the two things people aspire to become. But the only kinds of pain that should exist are heartbreak, grief, an occasional accident that's really stressful. But like, we have the technology and the power to eliminate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to undo a lot of the what's the word I'm looking for? Ghosts and bad ideas, memes, let's say, from the past, like shame, like guilt, all these different weird systems of control that are sort of imposed on a society. So anyway,
you keep slapping your hand against the.
Am I making noises? I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, you're making your points emphatically, and I think you're using the palm of your hand, which isn't good for audio.
I will disable my gesturing feature. So I don't think I'm actually answering your question clearly, though.
Yeah. Well,
because we could contextualize it into modern societies if you want to more.
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing that we've talked about before, as well, as the difference between seizing the means of production and not, which I think is an important point that you're underscoring is that, a lot of people see socialism as communism, or socialism slipping into communism, where all of a sudden the government is the one producing a nail, and a government is the one is the one determining how much that nail should cost. Well, what's the value of a nail? The value of a nail is determined by how much the person who needs that nail needs it. If you really need it, that nail is worth quite a lot. And that's the power of the free market, is you have people determining the cost of goods and services, which tends to produce a lot of innovation. But I think that what you're talking about is not seizing those means of production, but the surplus going to various services that we already have in some capacity already, right? So like one aspect of this is like the fire department is a socialist department, right? It's something that we've determined that, we as a society work better if we have an agency or a department that comes to our house and puts the fires out,
versus like
better
like
than
a capitalistic competitive system, like what they used to have, competing fire departments. Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, I think it's highlighted. You can see it in Gangs of New York, where the two fire companies show up and they start fighting over outside of a building. But like there was a time where you had to pay insurance, I think. But I know that it wasn't always just a part of society that there was a fire department you could, ostensibly rely on. There were companies that offered fire quashing services, or whatever fire departments did during those times. And there were multiple companies, though. So it was a confusing mess. And at some point, societies probably started on a small scale, said, hey, maybe it makes sense that we just have one in the city that everybody can rely on. And we'll work and try to build out capacity to make that as effective as possible. But yeah, as an example of where fire department or a service that society benefits from that doesn't have to be a profit-making exchange. That said, though, like the way the word socialism is used, and I also want to be very clear, there are much better people out there in the world to explain this stuff to you as well. I'm
sorry for putting you up on like...
No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that.
Hank, please explain the history of humankind.
Right. Well, give me just
easy
10
question.
more minutes.
Knock
I'll
it
be
out
done
of the
with
park.
that. No, I'm just saying like it's a big topic, and these are massively complex systems, and for me, partially too about my own story is like I'm new to this as well. Like that's kind of the thrust of my show is like I'm learning it and sort of sharing it as I go along too as well. I just don't want people to think that I think I'm representing what socialists want to say and what they want to believe and think. But I
appreciate you exploring it, though.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm clearly flailing my way through these topics and have come in from a very back door, but I think that it's important to at least try to understand and not just get so scared that you're not willing to explore it, because you'll have a lot of people pointing fingers at you if you start to ask a few of these questions. But one thing that was illuminating for me was when I kind of understood that we already have a partially socialist society. Right now, it's just socialism for the rich and powerful. If we lived in a truly capitalistic society right now, a lot of these industries would be failing completely. In 2008, when the banking crash happened, those banks would not have been bailed out. They made risky investments and they should have failed, right? But they're being propped up by the government. But it's just the direction in which that money is flowing. And right now, you and I are getting $1,200 checks in the mail, apparently.
I got mine.
Did you get yours?
Yeah.
Good for you.
They had the wrong middle initial. So I'm hoping it deposits and I don't get arrested or something crazy or scamming that. I don't know. Yeah.
But the majority of this money is going to those top 200 companies that have put in all of their investments over the year to ensure that the bills are going to be written in their favor, which I have a huge problem with.
Yeah.
Because rather than all this money trickling down to people that really need it, who are going to be put out on the fucking street if they can't pay their next bill, It's just being hoarded and deferred and put into offshore bank accounts, and it just continues to concentrate that wealth and power.
Right. So exactly, and that's the people who control media generally, and people who control cultural output are rich generally. People who have distribution into movie theaters and radio and all these. I mean, the internet has been a very democratizing force. There's a lot of bad parts about the internet, no doubt, but it's a much lower barrier to entry for elevating someone's voice. So that's what's created this churn and this din of noise that comes out of the internet. But our culture is shaped by what billionaires decide we get to consume. And so people have been conditioned to think that capitalism is the natural, and that's the only way, and that we're all just have to be capitalists, and that sorry, you said something that made me think of a thing, and I totally just lost track of that.
Well, I said crony capitalism. I said that we don't live in a truly capitalistic society right now. Well, and if we did, those risky investors would be fucking locked up, and their companies would have failed.
Yeah.
So it's a disingenuous argument when people just say socialism versus capitalism.
Agreed.
It's really annoying.
Yes, and we've been conditioned to be ashamed when we ask for help or when we need help. Means tested programs, Medicare, Medicaid, like a lot of the ways that I know that the requirements for Medicare and Medicaid vary, and states have different governors have different influence over how they accept the funds or not. Blah blah blah. It's complicated, but rich people don't seem to mind getting massive amounts of quote unquote welfare from the government. The military is a service to wealthy people. So much of what the military does, all that spending, it's over 50% of the federal budget. I was looking at some stats this morning about it. It was for 2015, I think is what the year I was looking at. But it's frequently the majority of, if not always, the majority of federal spending. And that's not because you and I are under threat. As Americans, we need that much money spent. That's a giveaway to the defense industry, but also it maintains access to resources for global corporations that pay the government for that service. And the government provides them with very profitable defense contracts to those specific defense contractor companies, but also that's a form of quote unquote socialism, if we're going to use it in that sense. But I was trying to clarify earlier, and not to say that we don't need any military. I think, I want to tell people, I'm not trying to say that I'd like a world where no military was necessary. That seems like a pretty reasonable goal, if unrealistic at this point in human history. But, calling the fire department socialism, though, a lot of socialists would probably object to that, not because it's about pedantry. It's just that there's a more specific kind of notion of socialism as just a more democratic way of empowering people, especially with democratic socialism, for instance. So I highly recommend the lectures of Professor Richard Wolff with 2 Fs. He's a really good speaker, gives these great little lectures. He's a university professor. He studied with Milton Friedman from the Chicago School of Economics in the 60s. He's a highly accredited guy. He's not just some quack that me and the socialist left are, enjoying. So he breaks a lot of this down, as well as Marxism too. And one of the key features of, I would say, modern socialism is that what we would like to see more, and what I think more people would agree to, is more control over their lives via democracy in the workplace. That is to say, unions, worker co-ops, or worker representation on boards and things like that, and perhaps other innovative corporate structures that might come up in the future. One of the things that people in a capitalist system are used to, so it seems normal, is working under a dictatorship. You don't get to decide when you go to work. You don't get to decide when you're done. You don't get to decide. I mean, you can decide to quit. They always leave that. They always dangle that out there. Go ahead, and if you don't have to, you're free to leave whenever you want and go jump into the, vicious maw of stress, the unemployment tiger that will slowly devour your body because America intentionally doesn't provide a social safety net, a robust one. I think that's what we're seeing right now with the bailouts with the current coronavirus crisis, because the $1,200 check, Canada is doing $2,000 a month until it's over. Other countries are doing something similar. And I think what they're trying to avoid is for people to get it in their heads that the government can actually be a force for good in people's lives. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble, but do people not understand how ridiculous it is that your boss is in charge of your life. When you work 5 days a week, you're giving 5/7 of your life to someone else's success and someone else's dream. And yes, there's a wage exchange, right? That's what we understand is the wage theory, or this the labor theory of value. You referred earlier to a nail that the value comes from, and that's known as the utility theory of value. And so actually this is something I learned from one of Professor Wolf's lectures, was about Marxist origins. Now, Marxism and socialism aren't the same things. Marxist was a socialist, but he developed his own like kind of theories and thinking about it. And this is all new to me too. And like my education of this stuff was, I just sort of lumped socialism in with communism, and I lumped that in with Lenin and Marx, and like these kind of scary outsider names and scary terms. And you just, no, we're capitalists, get out of here, worship George Washington and shut the fuck up. And that's what we are. We're America. We don't do that stuff. So only in the last few years have I been open-minded and like looking at it more and intentionally seeking it out. But what Professor Wolf was explaining is that what socialism is, what Marxism is actually a critique of capitalism. Like it's a necessary part of capitalism in a sense, so where like at least you can't persuade me that it doesn't deserve to be critiqued. If you think that the way things are fine, I think there's something wrong with you. We should improve it. And so if Marxist thinking and Marxist viewpoint leads to a slightly better capitalism, and a little pain and suffering is reduced because of that, meaning more people have access to the resources they produce or to the profits that they produce, then good. And it's probably going to be a gradual transition if we are actually going to transition to it, which honestly, I
explain a little bit more about co-ops, because I've had this conversation with other people about the authoritarian nature of corporations. And you mentioned, a different way of doing things. What's an example in the real world that it could actually work?
Well, there's a company in Spain called Mondragon, M-O-N-D. It's like M-O-N Dragon. And they're, I think, 80,000 employees. They're a huge co-op company. They do different types of like industrial services, and I think they manufacture stuff. One of their rules, I could be wrong, but it's even if I'm off by one or 2 points, it'll illustrate the point, is the most well-paid people cannot make more than, I think, 8 or 9 times what the least well-paid person makes. So it has built in a kind of a maximum, extraction level of those who have higher responsibilities. So there is still stratification. It's not about complete equalization of people. You still need to have conflict resolution. You still need to have hiring processes. You still need, you still need to do all the things that are necessary when you have any group of people around. It's just that everybody in that organization gets to weigh in on whether or not the CEO should get 300 times the average worker or 9 times the average worker. And it sort of goes without saying, we all know that given a choice, most people are going to vote for themselves to have a little bit more of what they do. Like I was thinking about this the other day. Like, what if anybody here is hearing this and thinking this guy's just some rambly lunatic, what he doesn't know what he's talking about, or Marxism is just nothing, whatever. But let me present this scenario. You're given a raise. Are you excited about the raise, or do you turn it down? Most people, the 99 whatever percent, are very happy to get a raise. And the reason is they want more money. But it also means that they aren't being paid up to their value or anywhere near it. And I guess I just offer the idea that if you could have a little influence, and it wasn't up to you to get the raise, maybe like they incentivize it, you work hard, you reach these sales goals or something like that. So in a sense, you can have some control, but it's your boss's call. They set the standards, and sometimes you can't get a raise because there's not enough money to give people raises. Like there's real world, guide rails on all this stuff. But if you could have a little influence over when you got a raise or how much, or maybe you wanted to have a little influence on the fact that you are doing the work to produce the value of the company, if you left it up to employees, they're less likely to give it all to investors, to equity investors, to pay it out in dividends to people who just bought it through the stock market. Not that there's anything wrong with doing that. I'm not saying those are bad people. That's just the system we have. But people who didn't do the work get the benefit. That's what we call stock or dividends, or the way, sometimes there's other ways of like splitting the stocks into, or various things. It's not always completely simple. Because that's the labor theory of value. I'm sorry. I mean, I realize this is all sounding very jumbled, but like, you make.
No, you're doing a decent job. I'm learning a lot. I'm letting you go.
Like Jeff Bezos, for instance. Does he do he's the world's wealthiest man. His wealth has gone up 24 billion. I don't know if it's him or if it's all the billionaires, but like something like that. Damn, sorry about that. But his net worth has gone up by billions and billions of dollars since the coronavirus pandemic started. While people are suffering, dying, this mass crime against humanity in America being inflicted against its own people, and the billionaires are doing great. Something's wrong there. And I always try to point out, unless Jeff Bezos is doing the deliveries, then he doesn't deserve anywhere near that amount of money. He deserves a lot. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that people who come up with these companies and quote unquote bear the risk of starting a business don't deserve nothing. That's absurd. And nobody on who takes this stuff seriously believes that at all. That's just the kind of stuff that you hear from those that are trying to end the conversation. If you showed me a video of Jeff Bezos doing all the deliveries, you could maybe persuade me that he deserves $190 billion. I'm not buying it, though. It's actually the drivers doing the work. It's the people packing the boxes. It's the people in the countries where they extract the minerals out of the ground that are producing for pennies a day or $1 or whatever a day in the third world where they get a lot of the resources. It's all the people throughout the supply chain and the production chain, and the higher educated people, like the graphic designers and the engineers and the people who design the machines that make the machines. And, like everybody except Jeff Bezos is doing the work. So he should get some of it. He's certainly done a lot of work, right? No issues there. I would actually propose a maximum wealth cap, I would say. This is me, not the greater socialist movement. But I think you don't need more than what number? 50 million, 100 million, $1 billion, and the retort to that would be, well, that would stifle innovation. Like, that's ridiculous, in my opinion. Like, what would Bill Gates have done differently if his maximum cap was, if his total amount he could ever own at any one time was capped at $1 billion? How would that have changed any incentives he had to do anything he did during his, creating Microsoft and Windows in his garage? Wouldn't change.
I've spoken with a number of libertarians, and I love having this conversation with them. And as I flail my way through it just as equally, their argument is that when do you have the authority to take my wealth? And they take it as violence against a person. Mm-hmm. If you and I are trading goods for services, a third party does not have the moral right to come in and extract some of that wealth, and that it's actually violence against two people who are in an agreed upon transaction.
Right.
What do you say to that argument?
Well, libertarianism intuitively makes sense on very small scales, right? Like if I have a fancy shell and you have a nice stick and you live down the river and we make an agreement that I'll give you my shell and you give me your stick. And then I get home.
Said dick.
I know. That's two.
It's the oldest profession,
that's
isn't it?
Two shells, Kyle. Come on, have some confidence. My mustache ride, my self-worth keeps going up. My mustache ride price keeps going up too. It's up to $7.21. Used to be $5 because I didn't believe in myself.
GDP, the mustache MP.
Exactly.
So the VIP, mustache MP.
Well, right. The enforcement, the part libertarianism breaks down, in my opinion, when the population gets too big to be enforced by going over there and arguing with them or beating them up or something. You have to have a mediation system. Also, you're not going to deliver your fancy stick to pick up my shells if without a road. And did you pay for the road? Did you build the road yourself? Did you do all that on your own? Or no? Or maybe you exist in a society that can enable that transaction using by having an entity that takes the money, part of the money from every exchange, and then spends it so that people can continue to fulfill those transactions. So yeah, I think libertarianism is a nice ideal. I just don't think that it works in real world terms. if you have a dispute, you need to have then what? The libertarian would say, well, you're free. He's free to hire. What if I want to go get my shell back from you? I show up with myself. We get into a fight. I come back with some people. You got your own. Now what? Now we have gangs fighting over a shell because of your nice dick. I mean, stick. Come on. It's like like at a certain point you have to have what's a more difficult thing, which is effective government. That's another part of what I think is lost in all this too, is like when you're promising to do something good and create something with a specific goal of trying to increase dignity and make sure that everybody has decent lives, that's a harder thing to promise because you're promising to create something. Destruction is always easier. Like it's one reason, like the Republican philosophy, the conservative ideology of government always being the problem. First of all, government's a massive giveaway, as we kind of been talking about. That's what this corruption in America is all about, is buying something so the government can give you a return on your investment. But in conservatism, I just lost my train of thought. It's gone.
We're talking about libertarianism, conservatism, needing to create something versus destroy it.
Their promises government is the problem, and so it's really easy to get into office and prove it. You don't. It's I always use this metaphor. Like it's a lot easier to miss a field goal than it is to kick a field goal. Right? There's trillions of ways to miss. There's a 15-yard. I don't know what the span is between the two yellow poles or whatever for our football fans out there. You got to do some things right to get a field goal. But you can just doff it into the back in the butt of the placeholder if you want. You can turn around and you could kick the ball completely opposite direction. Like it's a lot easier to break something than to create something. So when your political ideology is based on creating something better, automatically you have to meet a higher standard for how do you do it and how does it work. Especially when you have to overcome so much propaganda that's been kind of injected into the bloodstream over all these years. Because socialism is a threat to capitalist power. The whole point of resisting a union is because you don't want to give up control. People you intuitively know that you benefit when people are disordered. And when people organize, I just had this experience with the Young Turks. When people organize and say, hey, we as a group are no longer going to tolerate these certain set of factors, let's work on fixing this. All of a sudden, there's less power. That's what racism is used, and all these different ways of categorizing people that are intuitive, meaning like people. I think we should split people up into personality traits more than color or gender, because I don't know. I'm not sure what that even means. Not sure what I'm saying there. So, yeah. I hope I don't know if I'm answering any of these questions well.
Do you know the story of the French essayist Montaigne, when I believe this is back in the 16th century, there were European colonialists coming into Brazil, and they brought back a couple natives with them to show them the riches of Europe, expecting that then they could return them, and the natives would talk about how much better European culture was. And Montaigne asked the natives what surprised them most about European culture. The natives said what surprised them most was that you had people who were so wealthy that they were living behind castle walls. And just outside on the doorsteps, you had people who were so poor that they were starving. And yet the starving people didn't rise up and burn down the castles.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. It's amazing. I saw a tweet earlier today, like how are 329 million people letting 550 people ruin everything? The Congress, basically. Yeah. That's also stymie. Like I think that's partially too is connecting outcomes to behavior, meaning our education system doesn't teach protest. It might touch on it, but it doesn't teach how, and it doesn't teach how to lobby your local representation. You might have a brief civics lecture, but my understanding is civics education is very much reduced in terms of what's available to public schools. And
I'm actually thinking of writing an article about effective ways to engage in local politics. Mm-hmm. Like one, for example, the super simple one is to fill out the fucking census.
Yeah.
People have no idea how important the census is for determining funding over the next decade in your community.
Yeah.
And people are just like, it's this thing I get. I'm probably not going to fill it out. Like, no, that's a major first step in flexing that citizen muscle.
Yeah.
It's obviously not the last step, but I think that the political movement could and civic engagement movement could benefit largely from the human optimization movement in regards to how to create behavior change. The ketosis movement, right? Like they have guys like Tim Ferriss and Peter Attia and Ben Greenfield and, just like masters in behavior change. And they know what will get people to fall off, but I even me, someone who wants to be engaged in this stuff and learn about it, it's so easy to just feel dumb and put your hands up and say, all right, whatever, I'm going to throw on Tiger King instead.
Yeah. Tiger King. It's a lot. It definitely feels overwhelming. I think that's the hard work, or sorry, maybe not hard, but the effective work of demonizing the concepts. It serves the ruling class. The more they can make socialism seem like a scary term, the more they can drop Venezuela, or they can say something like that, or they just to confuse and to make you say, I can't do it. I got to go. Not to mention the other ways. I think a huge primary thing, a benefit, and this isn't even about socialism. Well, it relates to everything, I guess, but is time. Is how much fucking time we have to give to the ceaseless thirst, the profit lust of capitalism. How much more fucking resources do we need to scrape out of the ground and wear people down? There's a movement for the 4-day work week. I don't know if you're familiar with that much at all, but I'm highly in support of that. And it's actually one of the few areas of progress I actually think we might live to see in yours and my lifetime. Primarily because it actually, all the research that shows that when you cut hours down from 40 to either 32 or some sort of like 4 10-hour days, although that's not ideal. You really want to do like either 4 6-hour days or 4 8-hour days or whatever. That productivity goes way up because people have time to deal with their stuff outside of work. They have time to pursue something that might interest them. They time to relax, time to catch up. And I think it's Google that has that built into their workday, right? And at least at certain levels, like they have leisure time for you to have that empty space to come up with a creative idea because they understand how much that benefits them. Yeah, I think that was Google Japan, if I'm remembering correctly. But yes, it's every time it's tried, every time a company adopts a 4-day work week or a fairly without any loss of income. Like you still make the same money. That's a big part of it. It's not just like taking a 1/5 pay cut. It always works out better for the company because people make less mistakes. They take fewer sick days. They feel a little more respected, and they stick around. It's hard to find. It's hard and expensive to replace employees. So I actually think the 4-day work week has a lot of upside, aside from all the emotional benefits that regular individuals get. But because it is good for capitalism, the owners of the decision makers, the shot callers of society, could possibly be persuaded into letting us do that. And obviously, depending on the industry, the school, because we have 5-day schools. So if there's a certain critical mass, like a threshold where the whole society sort of flips into 4-day work week. And then also another way that you can increase employment is reducing hours too. You might have to have a bigger payroll in terms of just like you have to have 40 employees now when you only needed 28 before. Well, good. Now you have 12 people who are employed. I'm just making numbers up. But if you have X amount of hours per week, like if you're a store that's open 7 days a week, although maybe we could close on Sundays. Would it really be so terrible if we couldn't all go buy condoms at 11 in the morning on Sunday? As if I haven't bought a condom in years, man. It's horrible. I got some from the STD clinic.
Well, this is, but it's certainly, that we're in a time right now where people are seeing glimpses of these different societies. Right. It's the first time that a lot of people are getting checks in the mail from the government directly. By the way, Alaskans have been getting checks from the government directly for years because they set up a new set of laws where they all sat down and said, all right, we are so resource rich. The citizens deserve some of the wealth if we're going to be extracting these resources. So if you're a resident in Alaska, you get a check from the government.
Yeah.
And it's the first time we're seeing this now on a mass scale
but
in America.
You can only spend it on bootstraps. That's the rule. You got to go to the bootstrap, go down to Bootstraps and R Us, buy a good one, and yank on it real hard till things get better. Yeah, but
that's funny.
Stupid thing. Go ahead, finish it.
I think that to your point, we have not learned, how to engage with the government in school effectively, and right now we are being forced to through this pandemic. For the first time ever, a lot of citizens are now going on to California.gov and they're figuring out how they can get a check, and figure out what they can actually do. And it's forcing that education on, for people that have never done it before. So I do hope that we come out of this with at least a greater understanding of civic engagement. Maybe that's a kind of Pollyannish attitude, but
I thought I was going to be the negative one on this one. So no, when the quarantine and lockdowns started to come down and the virus was becoming apparent, like a big deal that required this massive response, it was pointed out accurately, in my opinion, that the policies Bernie Sanders has been advocating for are the answers we need to deal with this kind of virus. There's the immediate need of like, oh my God, we got to get people money and we should probably cancel rent, although they're not doing that. They're making sure that they're going to drain everybody's savings as much as they possibly can. It's all about gaining leverage, right? That's the power dynamics at play. But a pandemic like this is one of all the disasters. You want a competent government, but especially a pandemic because it's a slow motion kind of thing. It goes on forever. You really need competency in government. And we are about as at our, what's the opposite of zenith? I'm trying to sound smart. It's not apogee. I think that's the same thing as zenith. Why am I doing this? But we're at the bottom of competency right now. We have a extremely corrupt, intentionally malicious and authoritarian right-wing upswell of a movement that has manifested itself in a particularly odious person, although it still represents a very odious ideology overall.
Hey, sorry, I got to stop you because someone just. Sorry, that's very unprofessional.
Oh, not
apologize.
At all. Don't apologize. What's unprofessional is that shitty hair.
Dude, I gotta get this thing, this mop. Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah. All right, let's get back on track.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that this is creating more civic engagement. And I think on the local level is where it needs to happen. I think that that's really the only place where people can actually have an impact. In that video that we were talking about earlier, the Represent Us video, there was the Princeton study where over a 20-year period, they asked the question, how much influence do people have on government? And they found that if there is 0% support for an issue, it has about a 30% chance of passing through Congress. If there is 100% chance support of an issue, there is still a 30% chance of it passing in Congress. So there's virtually no influence that the average person has on government politics. That shifts when you get to special interests and the uber wealthy. They have a much greater influence on policy if they're interested in getting it passed. Mm-hmm. But I do think that a good entry point for people is local politics and figuring out who their city representative is and how they can handle it, how they can tackle it on that level. Because a lot of the more odious policies that are passed that really impact you and I are are passed on the municipal level. You have an organization like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, one of the they were the big winner of the Night of the Motherfucker Awards. They they were nominated in 3 categories, but they're coming in on the local level, and they're doing things like making it illegal to pass a plastic bag ban, because banning single-use plastic bags, even though that's having this tremendously negative impact on coastal cities and beaches, and then tourism, and it has a negative impact economically. Plastic bags do for tourism and just the beauty of cities. It also has a negative impact on the oil and gas industry, because plastic is derived from natural gas.
Right.
So they come in on the local level, and there are successes that also happen on that level if people are keeping their finger on the pulse of what laws are coming down the pike.
Yeah, and I think one area that the Democrats have seeded, and it's a massive opportunity to improve, although I don't have any faith that the current iteration of Democratic Party is going to do anything to improve it, is local influence and local campaigns. Like the right does a great job with that in terms of imposing their viewpoint on others, which is what a society sort of like is. Like, those who show up to write the rules are going to be the ones whose rules get written, and they understand what you just described, is that on local, that is a massive part, especially since putting a candidate like Bernie into the presidency was very unlikely from the outset. The fact that he got as far as he did indicates that his message is persuasive, and the concepts he's pushing and advocating are resonating, especially with younger people, because the further down the generational tower you go, the less affinity people feel for capitalism and for the current economic system. People burdened by student debt, people, all the different ways that people look at their future and say, well, I guess I'm just going to work for some asshole, and then eventually, hopefully, I will have enough to a couple years of going fishing, and then I'll die if I'm lucky. A lot of people don't get that at all. Maybe you'll get lucky, you'll get to work at Walmart as a greeter in your final years. So, but yeah, I agree. On the local scale, that is probably where these kinds of things are going to turn.
Do you have a process of asking yourself questions to look at these systems on a bigger scale? You said earlier in the conversation that you're naturally a systems thinker. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy this conversation because I do think that you're continuously taking one step back and then another step back, and you're looking at it from the perspective of happiness beyond just economic productivity. You take a very unique look at a lot of these systems that we take for granted.
Yeah.
Do you have some kind of process of asking yourself questions when you look at a new issue, or was that just something that you naturally did from the point of being a gun-toting 12-year-old?
Yeah. Man, the school took that gun right away. I was like, what? It's as tall as I am. Leave me alone. I didn't use it correctly. You're supposed to point the gun at people. That's what they're for. They're for suddenly having the power of God over a stranger. Why else have a gun?
You weren't supposed to keep it in the gun safe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we went hunting. We were hunters. I want to get into hunting. Like I eat a lot of meat, and then you and I could probably talk about this too. I'm fascinated by.
Come join, dude. I hunt pretty much most days in Santa Cruz. I waste so much of my time in the Santa Cruz Mountains trying to hunt turkey and deer. It's not wasted. I'm being facetious. Okay, you're just sitting. Hunting is like just sitting for long periods of time, silently hoping something comes, and 4 out of 5 times you just get back in your car and drive home. But it's very relaxing. Yeah. And I do.
Well, that's why you got to go to the grocery store and just shoot the gun at the meat section.
Well, I also hunt with a dude who's a very thoughtful guy. So we'll be out in the Santa Cruz woods, like whispering New Yorker articles to each other. The other day we were literally out
David Sedaris is trying to
redwoods.
Yeah, go ahead.
We were hunting like silently, and I was whispering the latest New Yorker article to him as we waited to hunt turkeys.
Hey, did you hear Frank Rich has a new column about Star Wars and related to the economic misery of the railroad company? Yeah.
Did you hear that Michael Pollan has a new book about caffeine? Gosh, I love him. The Omnivore's Dilemma was such a delightful read.
Yeah.
Yeah, we give wild meat to each other along with Joan Didion books.
Right. Well, hunting for me, like I go fishing a lot. I don't really fish here in LA, but when I go home, my family were very fortunate. We have a home on a lake up in Wisconsin, and great grandfather built it in like the 30s or something. It's this old wooden kind of shack, but it's a beautiful spot, and it's a privilege that I'm grateful to have in my life. And but I go fishing with my dad, and there is something so powerfully like I used to have a joke, and I don't know if I call it a joke. Here I am quoting my stupid old bits or tweets or whatever. Sorry if I do that. But like an orgasm is just your DNA applauding. It's like millions of years of genetic programming to go like, yeah, that's exactly what we're here for, motherfucker. Like that's what an orgasm is. And I could ramble about orgasms. That's my other podcast, Orgasmathon. But hunting is a similar thing. Not that I have an orgasm when I kill someone, but there's something about catching food, growing vegetables too. It doesn't have to be just an animal, but like catching a fish and then cleaning it and cooking and eating it. There's something so deeply satisfying about that. And kind of relating that to what I was saying about the 4-day work week and about time, because the greater point of that, and then I'm going to answer your question about where's my process. I think I have a decent, well, or at least something approaching an answer. But the point about the 4-day work week is that we're all so busy making rich people richer that we don't get to go do what you do in the woods with your New Yorker buddy. We don't get to go fishing as much as we could. We don't get to grow our own food and feel things that are in line with our instincts. Not that I think a whole society should be, you're on your own, grow your own food, go screw yourself, but we could set up a world where leisure, like if you were to actually care about spreading the largesses of capitalism, the productive capacity of organizing so many people into these productive units we call corporations. If you really cared about spreading that everywhere, you would, instead of hoarding the profits to the people who don't need any more profits, and they won't for millions of years, Jeff Bezos can pay his rent for millions and millions of years. He's fine. By the way, the billionaires are working on immortality. That's something they would all love. But I just hope that they pause immortality research until Trump is gone. I guarantee you don't want that dumb motherfucker getting the immortality pills. just from a sheer billionaire club perspective, I guarantee he's not the guy that they want hanging around for another 400 millennia. Anyway,
he's got speed.
Does he go slow? Like, is he like the Flash? You know how like the world is slow when they run fast? Like, is that how
Trump's got speed and Diet Coke? It's basically immortality pills.
I just imagine his consciousness is just like two dim light bulbs in an empty room. Like one of them is a TV. Or I said like one is like his own dim light bulb and one's a TV. And he just sort of like exchanges photons with this television, because then he sees himself on TV, so he gets to like experience this sort of strange narcissistic fantasy. Anyway, whatever. I'm angry that we have to break down that guy's psychology. It's such a curse to place into our minds, and he's going to be in every documentary for the rest of time. Isn't that a distressing thought? At least until 200 years from now, whatever. But so time should be returned to people, thanks to the productive capacities of society. And I would suggest, to tie it to socialism, is that it's not about inhibiting advancement or cutting down innovation. I would actually think that when people are less stressed, have more time or more emotional health, didn't have to overcome some kind of fucked up childhood. Some people don't survive their childhood. You know what I mean? I don't mean they get killed. I mean, they develop a coping skill that might be destructive, addiction or some sort of thing, and it might lead to them not making. I almost didn't survive in that sense too. I had a very difficult childhood, and had a drinking issue for a long time, and it was almost a fatal thing. Like the lucky of us overcome it somehow, and then I'm gonna probably be thanks to therapy and thanks to meditation and thanks to working on the Motherfucker Awards, I've been able to turn things around. I'm trying to give you a lot more credit than you. No,
oh,
but,
well done. Well, yeah.
I was about to do it
I'm not
until
your
this
guru,
Kyle
Hank.
guy got.
I'm not your guru.
Yeah, yeah. But
well, I agree 100% that you need empty space for innovation.
Right. But here's the point. Let me put it in the socialist terms. If people had influence over these decisions, would we work as... Oh, sorry, I keep tapping my desk. Sorry. If people had influence over these decisions, would we choose to do it the way we do it? I don't think we would. I'm pretty sure we wouldn't. I'd imagine people would say, oh, you mean I can have Friday afternoon off? Cool, I'll take it. Oh, I can have all of Friday off? Even better. And still take care of my family and feel secure and have some predictive power too. Capitalism is extremely unstable. It crashes every, 7, 8, 10 years or something. Massive crashes that require enormous government action to swoop in and bail it all out. Who would want to live with that kind of thing? It's like, now, I would think, and the history of socialism includes imbalances too, with like the Russian Revolution of the 1920s. And there's actually a lot of American socialism that is erased from education systems. Meaning there's been like a lot of strikes, like the May Day, actually that originated from a strike in Chicago. I don't know too much about that exactly, but I do know it's a holiday celebrated in other countries that America doesn't, because it's about worker power. And that's why socialists kind of are for it. But oh yeah, I was trying to tie it all back to this pandemic and final point is like, so we have an incentive structure through capitalism that we look at all the innovative products and things that are made, and we're pretty impressed with it. Pretty amazing. If we had a system that wasn't about profits only as a primary driving force, that was maybe about dignity first, like if this doesn't increase or add to someone's sense of security, stability, sense of self-worth, all the things that how do you define dignity exactly? Then you'll incentivize innovation around technologies to promote that too. But we don't have a system that promotes that kind of technology advancement. Like the vector we're on is how can we make as much money as fast as possible? Because people make rational decisions inside an irrational system. That's what people in companies do. People who work for these corporations, they're pretty rational people. They're highly educated usually, or, they're making rational choices. But the failure there is that within that immediate, like we got to increase profits this quarter or else we're going to get in trouble, or I need to make my bonus, is that it drives the overconsumption, and it drives advertising, which is a way of training people to want things that they didn't even know they needed. And I think advertising is kind of a ridiculous industry. I think it should be more about just communicating whatever. That's not trying to change that.
Well, to your point about the system of capitalism crashing every number of years and needing to come in and get bailed out, there's a documentary called Requiem for an American Dream. Mm-hmm. It's a series of interviews with Noam Chomsky, and he talks about how in the 60s you had this intense democratization movement where you had typically apathetic and groups, that were kept down, young people of color, marching in the streets, which resulted in this wave of environmental laws being passed, Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and regulation on corporations and regulations on the rich. Then the blowback from that in the 70s was lobbying groups being formed by the Reagan administration. You had a lot of deregulation happening, and then you have the savings and loan crisis. So Chomsky talks about how it was the result of deregulation that then allowed these crashes to happen. And we'll continue to see that the more deregulation we have. Right. I was thinking about this idea of go for it.
Just please finish. Those who are least able to endure the catastrophes are the ones who pay the highest price. Those who have the best ability to survive, the people with money, resources, savings, all kinds of connections, the rich, wealthy, powerful people, they can endure the crashes. So it's a nice feature of the system because it's like it's shaking everything up, and then the prices go down on land because a whole bunch of desperate people need to liquidate their only resources that they have. That's potentially crashing, although housing prices, that's its own bubble, and Anyway,
and where taxes are placed specifically in the 60s with that movement, you had more taxes on the wealthy, taxes on things like dividends, rather than the taxes that we have today, where you have someone who's making $60,000 a year and they're being taxed intensely.
Right.
You know, like I remember the first time that I, became a young adult, and then I went to the tax office and I was like, okay, well, I have this money. And they're like, well, actually you don't.
Yeah.
And I remember leaving that office like thinking I was going to throw up. I was like, wait, what? I didn't know that they were going to take this amount of money from me.
Yeah.
I'm 20 years old. Go for it.
I've had some rough years recently in terms of unemployment and doing Postmates and just gig work, which is, when you're in your like late 30s and so for a couple years before, just rewinding like 4 or 5 years or so, for about 2 or 3 years, I made about 20 grand a year, a little over than that, doing some freelance editing, animation. Very lucky to have a roommate who was okay with me being late on rent because he does fairly well. So I'm extremely grateful for that, because I definitely should be homeless would be homeless, but or at least moved on somewhere else. But anyway, I had to pay like $6 grand in taxes on like 21 grand or something like that. And you got Amazon or GE, or you could pick your company. So many examples where they make billions in profits and pay zero. So like a depressed Postmates guy struggling to find his footing in the entertainment world, paying $6 grand and of his 20 that he needs every bit of that. So yeah, it's weighed horribly against other people. And Warren Buffett was quoted once as saying like, well, why should I pay less, like a lower tax rate than my secretary? So go on.
Yeah, I when I first heard about universal basic income, the capitalist in me was like, this is bullshit. You want to incentivize people to work hard. They're just going to be lazy and stay at home, and they're not going to do anything with it. And I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and he was like, you get paid some money to surf, right? By Patagonia. And I was like, yeah, and I have for a number of years. And it's not enough that I can sit at home and do nothing, but it's been a supplement to me throughout my 20s that has allowed me to work on environmental documentaries, do something like the Motherfucker Awards, which isn't a profitable endeavor, but has hopefully social value, and spend a decade learning about the kinds of things that I want to learn about and I'm really passionate about, to hopefully be able to make a career out of something fulfilling. But that kind of stuff takes time. And I realized like, well, I don't actually think that I'm an exception to that rule. Like, sure, you might have some lazy people, but it feels better to create than it does to not create, for the human spirit. And I'm actually a great example of someone who has benefited from some supplemental income through my 20s and have been able to engage in some projects that were incredibly fulfilling.
Right. And had you had to have a full-time job, would you have been able to surf as much or pursue those other interests and other projects? No. You'd have been just another cog and too tired to do it. That's part of the reason why returning time to people is unlikely to happen. Now, I was saying earlier, I think it's likely because it's good for capitalists, but the bad part of that, the part that would be threatening to them, is that people would have time to call them on their bullshit. Like, exhaustion is a very effective system of oppression. If you're too tired, and then you're just sort of pumped, you work so hard, you go home, you got nothing to do. Maybe if you have kids, especially. I have so much respect for people who raise children. Not a child guy myself, not looking for it, but man, that's tough. There's so much energy goes into that, and but so you might have an hour or two to plug your head into an internet thing or the TV at most, and you got to get up and do it all over the next day. And on the weekends, there's just no time. So like you say, a UBI or some sort of program that helps people cut back on that stress would empower business creation, small business, true local sole proprietors and small businesses, and hopefully co-ops. Like, I'm actually currently trying to do like a woodworking thing, and if it ever actually becomes more than what it is right now, and I'm barely getting started on making videos, and building poop stools using found furniture on my balcony here in LA.
Are you selling it?
Not yet. I'm almost out of the workbench. Actually, I've been building the handle for the vise. I did that yesterday, and it's so satisfying. I love every bit of it.
Do you have a name for it?
Bum Rush Industries.
What's it called?
What
is it?
Bum Rush Industries. So I have
Bum Rush Industries.
Yeah. So you know the squatty potty. That's the toilet stool. So mine are called Bum Rushes, but I'll probably make like other things like, boxes and smaller boxes. But
to your point about parenting,
yeah.
If people had more time to parent well, you would also save so much money in society, because we know the connection between people with fucked up childhoods and drug addicts.
Yes.
How much money are we spending on the opioid epidemic because people are so damaged from some childhood where their parents weren't around, they didn't have time to communicate with them, with love and kindness, because they were fucking stressed because they're working 2 jobs 6 days a week, and they don't have any time to teach their kids healthy coping mechanisms and lessons through life.
Even a optimal 2-parent household is against our instincts. We didn't evolve that way. You had a mom who you knew because that was probably your primary, but you had tons of mother-aged women and tons of father-aged men in your tribe. There was no such thing as an orphan in that time. No, I wasn't there. But this is like something I was like, yeah, even just in our current world, where what we think is the natural family unit of a a mother, a father, and children, that's actually a kind of instinctive violation too. It can work, and it's better than a single parent or no parent, right? And depending on all the different ways your parents are exhausted by their day, by their job, by going to their, giving up 5/7 of their life to their boss's future. Even that can be damaging and like a truly fulfilling, emotional, healthy development for a kid. But I don't think that's going to change. I'm not saying that we should make everybody have 10 parents, but children, we weren't always raised like that. You were always raised around groups of other children, groups of parents. That's why there was like it's Chris Rhino, and we'll connect it to like Bonobos, and Sex at Dawn is such I think a groundbreaking, eye-opening book for so many people. We were just a big group of horny monkeys looking out for each other. We were like, the phrase I like to use is that we were camping swingers. That's what we were. Human beings we evolved as camping swingers. Like,
sounds like Santa Cruz.
Is that where the swingers like to do their camping?
Yeah,
a lot of
Santa Cruz,
tents.
the Redwoods,
Yeah.
Right next to where we're reading the New Yorker articles, hunting turkey. There's a commune of camping swingers.
Camping swingers. See, it's fun to say too.
It's a good name for a folk band.
Yeah, yeah, camping.
Well, I think though that it's great that you're talking about this stuff, man, because it will take a long time for systems to change, but you can change individual behavior immediately, and it might change some people's decisions, as they're figuring out where they want to live, and how worth it is it to live in some box without community and try and make it work on your own versus getting together with other people and figuring out some sort of community driven model.
Right.
I had the founder of Guayaki on my podcast. They make the yerba mate, and he lives up in Canada.
What is yerba mate?
Say that once more.
What is yerba mate? What? I don't know what that
yerba mate is. Like, it's a coffee alternative.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you make it, you drink it in a gourd. It's big down in Argentina. They have leather satchels and gourds, and they pass it around. Yeah,
I've got 2 white guys doing Southern South America.
But he lives on a commune up in Canada, and he said, "Dude, the benefit that has created in my life is just, you can't put a number on it. There are other families with other kids." And we all, there's a big garden, and we all have our separate domiciles. And, I'm the head of this big company. I travel around, but I come back to it. And it's so deeply satisfying to not feel that chronic loneliness that so many Americans are plagued by.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always this kind of is the answer to your question about my process that you asked earlier. I don't know if process is the word I would use, but I've always been like an outsider. Yeah, from a very young age. I never felt like I fit in or belonged in anything, even my family. And that's a pretty common trait with people who get into comedy or comedian type person. You know, that's sort of how I started my entertainment career, is in stand-up. But I've never felt, it's always been hard for me to connect with people and to find that feeling. And some people, I think, have a disposition where loneliness is sort of maybe an unfortunate, but kind of something that they get used to and it's familiar, and it becomes their way, and being around people would be too much for them. I have the kind of like version of it where it's like a painful, grief-stricken, achy loneliness, you know, where I really want to be able to connect with people, but I just, it's a difficult thing for me. Not that I haven't found some ways, but I'm kind of looking to get out of LA myself. I'm sort of tired of city living. 10 years in Chicago, it'll be close to 10 years in LA before too long. And I want to be near trees, and I want to be able to have a fire on a deck or in a yard and be with, but I don't want to do it alone. You know, and I'd love to do like a woodworking business and do editing and maybe some podcast. Like I have this sort of fantasy of getting some land and fixing up a house, or you know, because I could build. I love to fix. I'm a great boyfriend material, by the way. I could fix anything, whatever the fuck. Come on, give me something. I get so happy.
This whole podcast was one big ploy to get you out to any women listening to my podcast. Hank, he's on the market.
Yeah, tell him about my.
He's on the socialist
shoulders.
market.
Yeah. You don't marry a socialist guy. I'm a 6'3", and I might take boxing lessons so I can beat up somebody if you want. I'm tall. I got nice shoulders.
He's 6'3" and thinking about getting into working out.
Exactly. Yeah, there's some abs. Yeah, you're not gonna. Yeah, exactly. A little fucked up in the brain sometimes. You know, I get the case of the sads, but that's all right. But my point is though, like this is actually the loneliness thing. I think is a fundamental trait of humanity in terms of evidence for our past. Right? Like if you can just place yourself in the woods with a sprained foot. Do you sprain feet? You sprain ankles. Do you sprain other? Yeah, you can sprain other stuff. Sorry. Getting myself twisted there. Imagine that. Imagine being in the woods with a sprained ankle by yourself. That's a horrible situation. It's potentially life-threatening. If your leg's broken, you're probably dead. Usually, right? It takes an awful lot to get out of danger when you have a broken leg by yourself. But if you have somebody with you, your whole outlook changes. If you have a group with you, you have the security of knowing that someone else has your back, that you're not alone, that when you are in pain, it will be an emergency to someone close to you. And I think that's what dignity is. To me, dignity is the feeling that your pain is someone else's emergency. And I think that's why America is such a difficult emotion, like maybe it's almost like pollution, like an emotional pollution, that you don't feel that here when you don't have a good social safety net. And I'm a white guy from the Midwest. So people of color, people in marginalized communities and groups, they absolutely do not have confidence, not to speak for them, forgive me for that. But like the idea that the government is looking out for them and is going to show up when they have a problem it's not there. If you're wealthy, you get dignity because the government, your pain, even though when a rich person loses $1 billion, but they've got $20 billion, or whatever the numbers are, that's not exactly an emergency, but the government will treat it like one. And so that's what I want to expand as a society, is one where everybody's pain is an emergency, because that means that everybody has a problem that we can help each other solve. And it's not an accident that altruism is a good feeling. Like loneliness hurts and helping people feels good. That's an indication that we are an animal that evolved, there's plenty of solitary animals. We don't have to feel good from helping anybody else, but it's because human beings are an extremely vulnerable creature by oneself. But when you group up, and that's exactly how we evolved as groups, because we're highly social, we're almost like a distributing computing network in a way. You know, 8 dudes can take down a mastodon. Well, they run them off cliffs, pretty much. That's one of the more brutal ways of hunting. You don't do that with your turkeys, do you? Get them off the cliff.
No,
but the road runner.
but dude, anecdote. There's an island in Hawaii called Koholave, where they used to ranch cattle. It eventually got turned into a bombing range by the U.S. government.
Wow.
But before then, it was a cattle ranching island, and the Hawaiians would have to lead the cattle out into boats and kind of swim them out up onto the holes. And the waters were so shark infested that a lot of times the cattle wouldn't make it out. And the sharks then got the idea, they just bring them out at this time. We're going to come in and murph your cattle. So what the ranchers figured out that they needed to do was get a herd of goats and run them all off a cliff on the other side of the island, so that the sharks would circle the goats, and then they would run the cattle back out on the boats at that time. Yeah.
So goats are that less valuable to them then, huh? Like they could afford to waste
goats are everywhere.
Yeah.
Goats are everywhere.
I love goats.
It's insane.
You've got ducks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right.
I've got ducks. But yeah, goats are all over Hawaii.
Part of my fantasy of having a home near some trees somewhere, Colorado, Northern California, Oregon, or something like that, is goats. I love goats. They're so charming. They've got just such character to them. I worked at a barn when I was 13. It was like my first job mucking stalls. And there was a goat. It was the best part. I have such fond memories.
For anyone who wants to brighten up their day, YouTube screaming goats.
Oh, yeah.
So these are goats with fucked up vocal cords.
Like, and they sound like a guy screaming it. Yeah. Yeah, they just sound like a dude, like on the other side of a hill, screaming. It's so fun. Yeah. They're
well, you know what, man? As this whole podcast just you finally stomped the landing with your hey, I'm single and a great guy, and
I'm a good cook. I am a chef
to my audience.
I cook all the time.
I will. I'll reinforce your point about group activity, man. I work alone a ton, man, and there are days when I'm like, I need people. And as cheesy as it sounds, this last year, before the pandemic, I joined a CrossFit gym, and I would go there at 6 a.m. and do morning workouts. And there was a group of people there that I would never see as quote unquote my community, but then we would get through these workouts, which are fucking difficult. You're just going as hard as you can, and that whole conversation of like, I can't, it's very vivid in your mind. And at the end of it, you're high-fiving with each other, and it benefited my life on that level of like feeling like I was part of some kind of community so tremendously. So all of that is to say, you got to get back in Kosh's CrossFit gym.
I know. Yeah.
And do that. Do that before and after.
Well, no one's there now. Go ahead.
Yeah. What was your idea right before we recorded?
With
that you wanted to do a before and after piece?
Yeah. Well, did we explain that I've been working with Kaj Larson a little bit on some stuff, and I was hoping to get some free CrossFit membership or something by doing a before as a fat slob pre on his podcast. He might be doing something about fitness. And then like 6 months later, come back and be like, hey, look at me. This shit works. And it's an advertisement for his CrossFit business. And because I know it's an effective workout. I know it works. I mean, I've known a few people that have been into it. It works great. And I have potential.
Jared's
I have
out.
good upside potential.
Jared is out. Hank is in.
I'm in, man. Put me
Jared
in.
from Subway.
Yeah, quit quoting me, my act, all right? That's not fair. That's funny. And I have a Prius for the ladies. It's a 2012, leather seats. So come on by. Air conditioning. Great boyfriend.
Buddy, we've been going for a while.
Yeah,
this is such a fun
super
one.
Easy to do. We could.
I think you just summed up all of society, which is quite a feat.
Well,
I tip my fro to you.
Thank you. I appreciate your locks. If you see myself, I've actually been growing out my hair in solidarity. Look how weird I look with long hair. This is the longest my hair's been.
Well done.
I started, for folks who don't know, I'm a baldy. I started losing my hair at 19, which I believe gives me the right to talk about anybody's hair if they're a white guy. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'll respect.
You're like the guy who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and he's in one of the this concentration camps. What was the guy's name? I'm spacing on it. But he talks about what was it?
The author Elie Wiesel? Are you thinking of an author or like a?
Yeah, well, it was the guy who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Anyway, he talks about being in a concentration camp and how certain people would have the beard of despair, and they would stop cutting it, and you could always tell who had given up hope by who didn't cut their hair.
Yeah, it's a thing.
But Hank's partially bald, so he's never given up hope.
No, well, I'm just not bald on the outsides, like a children's soccer field. It's just worn out in the middle. But I haven't felt my hair feel the wind in 15 or 20 years. It's absorbent. It's actually long enough to be affected by gravity now, finally. So it's like I can feel my hair moving around. It's honestly really annoying. I think on the other side of this pandemic, we got to cut this bullshit about caring about hair, staining it, what do they call it? Dyeing your hair all the time, all the money that people spend to cut their hair. Fuck it. Just do like once a year cut. We'll cult member this shit out of this thing. And everybody needs to quit panicking about their stupid hair. Look at me.
For any photographers out there, please do a portrait series of people and their hair in this pandemic.
I think it's interesting. It is kind of an interesting like meter slowly filling up. You know, if you're fortunate enough to not have to be on the front line. I feel terrible for the healthcare and other people that are taking risks. Yeah. But yeah,
buddy, where can people check out your podcast?
Oh, sure. Winners and Losers on Instagram or Jesus Christ, iTunes. I do like my political. I started in 2010, so the archives go way back. But I do like a political solo kind of thing that I call that Perfect Union. So if you want to hear me ramble about politics, I also do like a kind of a nerd YouTube channel called Suck Professor, where my roommate and I, we're both big geeks. We talk movies and shows generally. We also do some video game stuff. We're not real aggressive on that. We just finished the Westworld season, but we're not. That's sort of just another place for podcasting. But there's like over 1,000 videos on there over the years. And Instagram, and if you tune into the podcast, I'll keep you updated on the poop stools, and you can buy something that I made with hand tools on my balcony, and it'll be good.
I want one of those. I'll link to all your stuff below. And
Thank you.
As soon as you come out with a shit stool, I'm going to be customer number one.
Have you used one?
Let me know.
Have you tried it?
Oh, I'm a big fan of the squatty potty.
Yeah.
It's part of my. If I have a religion, it's squatty potty.
It's like putting on glasses for the first time if you needed them. Like, it's amazing, and that's another evolutionary thing. It's like your body likes to be angled just so. So my suggestion, and then I'll let you go. I know we're trying to end the show. 7 inches is the kind of the standard height. Find a box. It doesn't have to be perfect height, but just find a box that's 6 to 8 inches, and sit on that or put that on under your feet while you're squeezing one out. And you will have a religious experience.
Hank Thompson, you're black. Well done, man. That was great.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. All right. Wasn't that fun? How much did you learn? Did you have a nice time? That was, there you go. Kyle, as you could tell, good guy, really easy to talk to. I like the way he tells little anecdotes. It's kind of just like to be quiet. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm learning something from Kyle now. That's cool. So very good. Kyle _T-Man on Twitter. Kyle.surf or some shit. I'm sorry, I don't know where the hell is my thing. There it is. Yeah, Kyle.surf. That's his website. You can find links to his podcast, links to Motherfucker Awards, links to his Instagram, and blow it up. Let's blow up his shit, okay? Put a smile on that guy's face, you know what I mean? Of course, he lives with ducks, so he's probably always smiling. Because how could you not smile when you're around a duck? Lucky-ass motherfucker. Although I don't know if they're indoor ducks. I'm pretty sure they're outdoor ducks. People don't do ducks inside. Indoor ducks? Come on, what is this, the future? Give me a break. By the way, why are Roombas circular? They should be duck-shaped. And they should peck at all the stuff that they suck up out of the carpeting. Bunch of robot ducks swimming around on your carpeting, tasting, I was going to say sipping, pecking. I think that's what ducks do, right? I like that they make noise when they do that little thing. Anyway, I watched a documentary about ducks last week called The Original Duck-umentary. The quality of the film was a lot better than the quality of the film's title, so I highly recommend looking that up. Original Duck-umentary. I think I found it on Vimeo because I'm cool like that. All right, thanks for listening. Look out for more. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wash your feet. Take your weekly shower. Don't wear food-stained clothes to the store. I think I did that once. I had a hoodie. I I mean, like recently, and I didn't realize there was a little splatter on there. But you know what? This is splatter season, baby. It doesn't matter anymore. You know, the kind of food stains that are really embarrassing are the ones that are like an object, like a grain of rice or like a dried noodle, something you could actually like pick up. That's not just like a soaked in stain. Chunk of a Twizzler, a Frito, pork rind, something like that. All right, I don't know why I'm doing this part, but just remember, you have worth, and it's time to start insisting on having that respected. All right? Now get out there and do it. By that, I mean masturbate on your balcony. Fuck it. Masturbate all over the place. Okay, goodbye.